Welcome to Tales of the Famous, the channel that drags legends back into the merciless light of truth, that tears away the carefully polished masks of the untouchable icons, that dives without hesitation into the darkest corners of glory and takes you where no one else dares to follow. Behind the blazing studio lights of Los Angeles in the autumn of 1971. Behind the smug smile of a 53-year-old television interviewer who believed he was about to dismantle a Chinese-American stuntman in front of a live audience. Behind the moment when arrogance collided head-on with genius and the entire room discovered, in real time, that the man they had invited to be humiliated was about to humiliate them all without ever raising his voice. The studio was Studio 8B at the old NBC lot on Sunset Boulevard, a cavernous space that smelled of hot lights, cigarette smoke, and the faint metallic tang of nerves. 40 people sat in the audience, a mix of housewives who had won tickets in a radio contest, a few martial arts students who had begged their way in, and some junior executives hoping to spot the next big thing. The set was simple: two leather chairs angled toward each other, a low glass table, a fake plant in the corner. The Red Live sign glowed above the camera like a warning. Backstage, Harold Jennings adjusted his tie in the mirror and allowed himself a small, satisfied smirk. He had interviewed presidents, rock stars, Nobel laureates. He had reduced grown men to stammering fools with a single raised eyebrow. Today would be easy. The guest was Bruce Lee, 30 years old, some kind of kung fu guy from a canceled TV show called The Green Hornet. Harold had watched a few clips. Fast kicks, weird screams, shirtless fighting. Perfect television fodder. He turned to his assistant Melanie, a nervous 22-year-old clutching a clipboard, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "5 minutes of this, and the audience will be begging me to move on to something serious." Melanie forced a smile. She had read the prep notes. She had a feeling Harold was wrong. Bruce Lee stood quietly in the corner, stretching his wrists, breathing slow and deep. He wore a modest gray suit, black loafers, no jewelry, no watch. Nothing to announce power. Everything about him said calm. Melanie approached hesitantly. "Mr. Lee, we'll be ready in 10. Bruce smiled, warm, genuine. "Thank you. And please call me Bruce." Harold overheard and chuckled from across the room. "Bruce it is. Tell me, Bruce, are you planning to smash the coffee table if I ask something too deep?" The crew laughed nervously. Bruce didn't. He simply replied, soft but clear, "I prefer conversation to confrontation." Harold's smirk widened. Witty too. This will be fun. The theme music played. The audience applauded on cue. Harold strode onto the set like a lion entering the arena. Bruce followed a step behind, bowed slightly to the crowd, and sat. The red light came on. They were live. Harold wasted no time. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, voice dripping with polished sarcasm. "Mr. Lee, you've dazzled audiences with high kicks and shirtless fight scenes, but let's talk substance. Can you offer anything deeper than the next action movie?" The audience tittered. Melanie winced backstage. Bruce didn't flinch. He adjusted the button of his jacket, looked straight at Harold, and answered in a voice so calm it seemed to lower the temperature in the room. "It's not fighting, it's learning. Fighting is about defeating someone else. Martial arts is about defeating the limits within yourself." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Harold chuckled, but it sounded forced. "Poetic. I'll give you that. But when you're flipping someone over your shoulder, are you thinking about limits or choreography?" Bruce paused, not for effect, but because he was choosing his words the way a surgeon chooses a scalpel. "I'm thinking about balance, flow, timing. Not to look good, but to express something truthfully through movement." Harold's smile tightened. "You make it sound like a dance." "It can be," Bruce replied, "but it's also survival. And survival is the most honest thing there is." The room shifted. You could feel it like the air before a storm. Harold tried again, sharper this time. "You've said before that to be like water is the goal. Sounds good in a fortune cookie, but what does it actually mean?" Bruce turned slightly in his chair, meeting Harold's eyes for the first time without the polite veil. "Water adapts. You pour into a cup, it becomes the cup. You pour it into a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Water is humble, but strong enough to wear down mountains. A beat of silence. Even Harold blinked. That's very philosophical for someone known for punching through walls, he muttered, trying to recover. Bruce smiled, gentle, almost kind. That's because you only see the punch. You haven't seen the years of quiet discipline behind it. Offstage, Melanie scribbled that quote on her clipboard, underlining it twice. She didn't know why yet, but it felt important. Harold shifted tactics, voice rising a notch. Okay, fair enough. But isn't martial arts inherently violent? You talk about discipline, but at the end of the day, it's combat. Bruce's expression didn't change. Violence is misused power. Martial arts teaches control over your body, your ego, and your instinct to react. Harold's jaw tightened. The conversation was slipping from his grasp, and everyone could feel it. Realizing he had to push harder, Harold went for the kill. But let's be honest, you're in Hollywood now. You're cashing checks. Isn't all this philosophy just marketing to make violence sound noble? Bruce's smile returned, but this time it was different, sharper, like a blade catching light. If I wanted to market violence, I wouldn't be quoting Lao Tzu. I'd be selling guns. Laughter broke out from the audience, genuine, surprised. For the first time in decades on air, Harold looked rattled. The segment moved into its second block, and Harold, now slightly flushed under the heat of the studio lights, decided it was time to switch to intellectual artillery. He rifled through his blue cue cards with theatrical flair. You're known for spouting Eastern sayings, but I'm curious if you've ever grappled with Western philosophy. He didn't wait for a reply. Let's talk Descartes. Ever heard the phrase cogito ergo sum? Bruce nodded. I think, therefore I am. Harold raised an eyebrow, surprised. Interesting. And Kant. I believe he said that enlightenment is man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. Bruce replied calmly, without hesitation. Harold faltered for just a second, masking it with a sip of water, but Bruce continued before Harold could pivot. But knowledge alone isn't enough, Bruce added. What's dangerous is when intellect becomes arrogance. When a person knows just enough to believe they've figured out the world. There was a gentle, elegant pushback. No anger, no insult. But everyone in the room, crew, producers, even audience members, sensed the power in Bruce's words. Even Harold. Harold tried to recover. So you're telling me you read Kant and Descartes between nunchaku lessons? He said it dismissively with a laugh. Bruce chuckled lightly. I also studied psychology at the University of Washington. I spent hours in libraries. I used to carry a notebook and write down thoughts that came to me while training. Now that surprised even Melanie backstage. She had done the prep sheets. She hadn't seen much about Bruce's academic background. A quiet twist, but one that landed hard. Harold tried one final swing. What about science? Physics? That's a language most actors steer clear of. Bruce's reply came instantly. Newton said that an object in motion stays in motion. That's every punch I throw. But he also said every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That's why I train not just my body, but my mind to respond rather than react. Another pause. Then Bruce leaned slightly forward, locking eyes with Harold. I don't separate body and mind the way some do. Martial arts is the science of the body, and philosophy is the language of the mind. I'm just translating between the two. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. The crowd, silent throughout, finally stirred. A few subtle claps started in the back, then spread gently. Not applause for entertainment, but for truth. Harold tapped his pen again, this time not out of arrogance, but as a way to process the shift happening before him. He reached for one final card from the stack he had nearly discarded earlier. A curveball he had planned to throw to catch Bruce off guard. You once said that to know oneself is to study oneself in action with another person. What does that mean exactly? Bruce's eyes didn't waver. It means you don't discover who you are by sitting alone in silence. You discover it in conflict, in love, in conversation. We are revealed through connection. And right now, Harold asked quietly, almost despite himself, what's being revealed? Bruce smiled just enough. That truth is rarely loud. And humility is often misread as weakness. That was it. The moment Harold finally understood. Bruce Lee was a genius, and he had nearly missed it, not because Bruce was hiding it, but because Harold hadn't looked closely enough. The interview ended not with a loud crescendo or dramatic music cue, but with a bow. Bruce stood, bowed slightly toward Harold and to the audience. Harold, breaking all norms of his typical ego-fueled exits, stood as well and bowed back. It wasn't planned, but it was real. The red live sign turned off. And just like that, the moment was over, but no one in the room was quite the same. Bruce quietly gathered his jacket from the back of the set while Melanie approached, still gripping her scribbled notepad. She stammered. Thank you. That was something else. Bruce smiled. No need to thank me. Harold remained by the desk, still holding the final cue card. It now felt childish, pointless. He folded it in half and placed it on the table. Backstage, he caught Bruce just as he was leaving. Mr. Lee, he said, his voice no longer carrying its familiar sharpness. May I say something? Bruce turned. I came here ready to tear down a myth, Harold admitted. But you didn't build one. Illy. You build a bridge between strength and thought, between East and West, between man and mind. Bruce offered no smugness, just a soft smile. Then I did my job. I underestimated you, Harold added. I'm used to that, Bruce replied without bitterness. But now you don't have to. They shook hands. That night, Harold Jennings did something he hadn't done in over a decade. He rewrote his column 3 times. The original title had been Hollywood's Muscle Man Talks Philosophy. Sort of. Instead, he changed it to Arrogant Journalist Tries to Humiliate Bruce Lee. Has no idea he's a genius. The piece was published across dozens of newspapers. The letters poured in, school teachers, professors, martial artists, students, people who had never even watched Bruce Lee's movies but were now buying his books, quoting his lines, sharing clips from the interview. Months later, Bruce would pass unexpectedly, young, brilliant, and far ahead of his time. But the echoes of that interview continued to ripple through classrooms, studios, and hearts around the world. And Harold, he kept the interview recording in his study. Whenever someone asked him about his most difficult interview, he'd say nothing. He'd simply press play. Years later, on his deathbed, Harold told his grandson, "Remember that name? Bruce Lee. He taught me more in 1 hour than most men do in a lifetime." And somewhere in that space between movement and stillness, between intellect and instinct, Bruce's voice echoed softly, "Be water, my friend." Tell us in the comments, no filter. Have you ever seen arrogance backfire this badly? What would you have done if you were Bruce? Has this story changed how you see him? Thank you for staying until the end with Tales of the Famous. Like, share, subscribe, hit the bell. The next revelation is coming soon. See you soon. And sometimes the quietest voice is the one that shakes the world the hardest.